Hello once again everyone, and welcome back to our newest episode of Moveset Breakdowns, where we're continuing with For Honor and finally tackling my old main, the Warlord. So, a couple of things about the Warlord and also about the equipment I'm using right now. The Warlord is the Viking heavy, right? And as such, he is a bit more of a defensive character. His shield that you'll see historically is that you'll see in the game at least, is a center grip shield. And as I talked about in the Valkyrie video, when you're using a center grip shield, that means that now you can rotate it kind of around your wrist, as opposed to if it was strapped to my arm, it'd be rotating around my shoulder/elbow. So that means that this shield is much more mobile. Now, compared to a historical shield, this thing is way too thick. This is super overbuilt and not at all historical, but coincidentally, it kind of mimics how most of the shields look for the Warlord, so it kind of helps. And honestly, using this guy, doing his moveset, kind of informs a little bit about why some things look the way they do. As for his sword, he is using a simple double-edged arming sword, Viking sword, whatever you want to call it. Some of his customization options do allow for more of a pronounced crossguard. Some also have a simpler crossguard, so really, me using this isn't weird at all. Now, when it comes to his basic stances, we're going to see a bunch of interesting things. So first off, his initial stance that's going to guard him, he's going to have the low down, kind of typical Viking posture. His left foot is going to be forward, and he's going to mostly favor his left foot being forward, which is interesting, as underneath my shield, that's a decent target and pretty easy blind spot for people to take, but if you're ready to defend it, it's not too big of a deal. So, for his sort of open guard, if you will, where he is defeating an attack on this side, he'll just have both hands kind of open. Whereas if he goes to guard on his right side, he will now turn the shield rather significantly, as well as reinforce with his sword. Then for the top, he moves the shield above his head and now places the sword onto his shoulder. So, in regards to, covering yourself with the shield, he is definitely making really big openings. But there's a little bit of kind of refinement within them that I want to talk about. So first off, his just standard open position is, well, his standard open position. Any video game character pretty much takes this stance at one point or another. But when he guards on his right side, and I'll turn around so you can see it, he very much focuses on this reinforcement, which looks a lot like if he were standing behind someone else, either guarding them or reinforcing something. So I think that's kind of where he learned it, is the idea of putting sword and shield together. He's just doing it to give himself an opening on this side, rather than having the sword, presented up or something along those lines. He's just kind of keeping it back. When it comes to guarding his head, now in a one-on-one context, this does not make a ton of sense unless I was, dropping into an attack or something. But remember, For Honor isn't necessarily just about fighting, individuals or even small groups. Most often than not, it's framed around a siege or things where you are attacking fortification. So, him getting used to raising his shield over his head to protect against things falling on him makes total sense. And he's also raising his sword up into pretty much a standard, Vantag, what you want to call it, just at the shoulder, ready to attack. So overall, as his positions go, nothing odd. I mean, it does look odd because he's moving the shield so much, but I don't think it's out of character per se. Now, when it comes to his attacks, of course, if you haven't played For Honor, you have your lights and your heavies. Now, what's interesting about the Warlord is the footwork that he's going to favor, and for this I am actually going to set the shield down. So, when it comes to his footwork, he is going to, like I said, favor the left foot being forward. So that means for the majority of his attacks, be they light or heavy, he's going to kind of chamber. So he's going to kind of bring back 1, 2. Some even he's kind of shoving himself forward like a small lunge, which looks like this. Boom, right? Which that still will achieve what you want. It's just I'm reserving my hip now. So a little bit odd that he isn't using some passing footwork, but it's not out of the question at all. Especially considering how he uses his shield in these lights. So, for our first light, coming from our side, if we're going to attack from our left side, because I'm guarding my left side at the moment, and thus my attack will come from it, he's going to keep a very small cut, right? He's going to first bring the shield up as he chambers his attack, boom, and then he's into guard again, right? Now, what's interesting about this is every time that the Warlord attacks, he is going to first cover that opening with his shield. The reason for this is that his animations were designed around the idea of being able to block light attacks. Well, light on light, I believe. The way it works is basically if you're playing the Warlord and someone attacks you, and you do a light attack on the same line, you'll catch on the shield and your hit will go through. So the Warlord is very much chambering that in all of his basic attacks. So he raises the shield up, then puts himself forward on the attack. So I've covered and attacked. His cuts are very small, at least on his lights, really just barely going through target. On the other side, meanwhile, same sort of idea. He's going to first cover and then cut down. Here's that again. Cover, cut down. And from above, definitely this one's the most apparent. Cover, and he'll cut just straight down in front of himself. But again, does not bring that right foot forward. So here's that again. Cover, cut. So overall, he's mostly hinging from the elbow for his cuts, which nothing really too bad about that per se. It does incline you to get tennis elbow if you do it too much, but considering he's not worried about reaching out with these attacks and they're just quick little attacks with the tip, I think it fits with him pretty well. And it does look really good if you can land those, like I said, those light counters where, you know, I've had things where I'm driving someone up the stairs and I'll catch, cut, and it looks good. It can really end up looking quite good. And his footwork being very simple, just kind of pushes him forward. Now, when it comes to his heavy attacks, that's where the moveset kind of starts to get a little bit meh, in my opinion. So, for that, what we're going to have is he's going to rear back, and now he's going to use that passing step. So for his just one attacks, what it'll look like is this. Let's go ahead and go from here. So he's going to rear, and he'll go ahead and let his shield kind of fall behind him as he attacks. So here's that again. We'll go from here now. Rear, cut, right? Just a big old passing step. If you do two heavies in a row, which is one of his options, he's going to spin around with it. So what that'll look like is this. Rear, heavy, spin, heavy. And certainly, compared to other weapons, spinning around a shield that is not very well weighted really throws off your balance. So it's not much of a surprise that a lot of his heavy attacks look a little bit, but he's very much putting his body weight into it. As for, you know, why he's spinning around with them is probably mostly just a momentum thing. When he's doing a heavy, he's putting everything into it. And since his shield is falling behind him, his CG is kind of going with that cut. So turning around with it makes the most sense for him in that moment. I think as far as armor goes, he's got enough armor he can kind of get away with it, especially considering he originally, I don't know if he still does in the rework, had hyper armor on his heavies, so you can maybe get away with it. But from those basic attacks, let's start talking about some of his combos. So his first combo is going to be just a light into a heavy, right? And what that's going to look like, we'll go ahead and go off of here, right? So a light, boom, same as we normally do, followed by a heavy, he's going to spin with it. So light, heavy, we're in guard again. Alternatively, now from the front, light, heavy. I'm not going to try and spin much faster. My spinning record and my kicking record are not particularly good on this show. Here's from the other side. Lights. Oh, and I need not passing that. Lights. Heavy. And you could maybe say that he's possibly striking with the shield slightly here, and certainly when there were minion kill animations, then you would see a lot more of that, but these days you don't, so But those are his that's kind of his basic attack, and he of course uses the spin. Now when he does a heavy to heavy, as I've already shown, he'll spin. When he does a heavy to light, he does not spin. So what that looks like, and that's where I like his animations a little bit more. So let's say I'm going to do my heavy, right? So over here, rear, cut, then he'll go ahead and have his arm very tight for his next cut. So he lets that momentum go down, brings it back around, covers with the shield, and then brings that left foot up again as he finishes. Because pretty much almost all of his heavies will end up with him kind of turning around or bringing that right foot up. All his lights now get to land with that left foot coming forward, which looks quite solid in my opinion. So here's another example where now we're going to heavy, rear, cut, then this nice little light from my left. Here's that again now from the side. Rear, cuts, cut. Very strong, very solid, and I really like the way those mechanics look. As far as heroes using their hips with one-handed weapons, the Warlord is king. Berserker being close second just because he's hopping around. But from there, just checking my notes real quick. Yes, He will also chamber lights together, which those he pretty much just moves his arms independently. So for example, I could go light, light, without any crazy difficulty or things along those lines. And like I said, he really is chambering that hit because he first guards himself, which is cool, as his attacks are relatively reserved, and they are hitting mostly with the tip, so a good light attack. Now, where we start to get into more interesting things for the Warlord is going to be when we start talking about his specialty moves. So the first and most obvious would be, of course, his full block, which is going to look like so. He's going to just crouch down and bring the sword and the shield together. Now, does this actually protect a whole lot? Sorta. I mean, I'm reinforcing it. I've lowered myself, in theory, maybe, and he, like, really lowers himself, but I should point out with how massive his shoulders are, it really looks more like he set the shield on the ground and is still hulking behind it. But anyway, I digress. Out of that, if he blocks, he will kind of use both weapons to shove it away and then launch into his attacks, which is most often going to be his headbutt. And you can just headbutt out of it as well. So for the headbutt itself, it's not anything too crazy, just block, rear back, drive, and then from there, you also have a stab. The stab can also come off of just a normal block. So from here, I block, boom, and it is nothing too fancy, just chambered hit, extension beyond the shield, and it's back, or in the case of the headbutt stab, we're just moving around, we're fighting, boom, whoop, and we're back in the guard. Nothing crazy. Now, sorry, a lot of things to cover here. But as far as moving on into other kind of mechanics that he gets, he's going to have some interesting things on his parries in regards to use of his shield, both his parries as well as then his use of guard breaks. So let's talk about those. So every time he parries, when he just blocks, he'll just use the shield, in which case he'll return with a light of his own if you do it right. But if you parry, he'll always use the sword. Now on some sides this can look a little bit dramatic. So for example, Cut's coming in toward my left, he will parry with the shield basically behind him, then he'll bring the shield up and across. And why that matters is because he's using the shield to expulse the sword basically to where it was going rather than back to where it came from. And this will set him up to using his shield bash. So, what that'll look like, we block with the sword, bring the shield over, smack back with the edge of the shield, boom, and then from there we can launch into the rest of our attacks, which creates an opening. So that's on that side. Alternatively, over here, he will go ahead and block. Now he'll take the shield, clear it over, and then strike more forward with the shield. So if you go from your left to your right, he'll bring that shield, he'll bring that shield over to his right side, then back with his strike, versus if you do it on the top or from the right, he will, block, clear it to the side, to his left, and then strike out with the shield on that one. Which, I mean, I personally like the shield strike a little bit better, as certainly this is wearing on my shoulder rather significantly, and the shield strike, this one, is a little easier to do with repetitions, but swinging the shield from this way, that's a big backhanded strike, that would suck. But his basic covers are going to be, like I said, here, here, and then a nice St. George, honestly. Like, he really puts all of his structure into blocking that initial one from above, so that's pretty cool. Now, other times that he uses the shield are going to be a little bit different, and those will mostly come up as executions, so we'll get there again in a moment. But from there, his other kind of major moves that he gets are going to be his Viking breaststroke, as I call it, which is his area attack, which that one is relatively straightforward. He's just going to throw out with both weapons. So even though the cut only goes from about here to here, it will hit people on this side as well with the shield and causes the equal amount of damage. So Viking breaststroke, boom. I'll throw it from the side, boom. Nothing too crazy. And I love doing Viking breaststroke in the headbutt because it just looks so funny. And then of course, his other main one that I just mentioned that I totally forgot. Come on, Brain. Yes. Yeah. So his head splitter, that's the one. So for the head splitter, and I'm going to go ahead and set the shield down for this because this involves leaping, and I don't want to accidentally fall over onto that shield. He can do it out of a run, in which case he'll just leap forward and attack, or he can do it just in general if you dash forward and attack. But all that's going to be is we're fighting, and he just brings himself straight down. So he gets good distance, chops straight down, nothing really out of the ordinary there. He'll also rush into people with the shield, of course, but that doesn't really need demonstrating. So, all in all, we've got a bunch of moves which kind of have a general core of relatively simplistic sword movement and a decent amount of use of the shield. And I think the executions where that comes out the most are going to be twofold, and so some of my favorite executions. The first of which is going to be relatively simplistic. So what will happen here is when you land your heavy to finish, you'll end up right foot forward as always, right? So we're going to clear that out, and in is going to come a strike, which the Warlord is going to block with the shield at about head level, right? Sorry, chest level. Boom. Next what's going to happen is the person whose block we just blocked, that sounds terrible, the person whose punch we just blocked is going to swing back toward our head with kind of a back fist. So we're going to drop to a knee. Specifically, he drops to his left knee, I should point out, which is weird because I always want to drop to my right knee. I don't know why, but here's that again. Boom, rip, block, down, and we're going to rise up with a thrust into the torso, stand off of it to clear. So here's that the other way. You land your hit, rip, block, down, stab, raise, clear. I think that's a pretty cool execution as it shows a good level change, which is not something he does a whole lot during his fights, but he also focuses on the idea of protecting himself behind the shield with that drop, and then takes that opportunity. Now the other one kind of branches off that even more, and now we're going to start to see him really use the sword and the shield in conjunction, like he does when he fights. And what's going to happen for that one is we will first land our blow, as we did, rip clear, first strike will come in, we're going to block it in the same way, but rather than just bringing our shield over here, at the same time we're going to throw a strike over and around from our left side. Now, if he could do this as just a default move, that'd be really, really cool, because he's using the shield to defend and then striking over his arm at the same time. This is something you see all the time in shield work. But he's going to be striking high with this first one, about upper chest level, almost shoulder level. So we've landed, clear, block, cut. Now from there, the opponent is going to swing at our other side, so we're going to block, cut, and this time we're going to bring our shield more upward as we come across and throw our strike more at hip or thigh level. So we've disabled one arm, now we're disabling that leg. So here's that again. Landed our hit, clear, block, cut, block, cut. Now from here, I wish he'd done something with a sword, but he will instead just shove forward with that shield and do a nice larynx crush. So overall pretty good. Let's see it from the other side. So land, clear, block, cut, strike, boom. And then from this side, land, clear, block, cut, strike, boom. So overall, as far as the Warlord goes, he's pretty awesome. So what do we learn about him from him doing that, right? Well, a couple things. First and foremost, whoever did the motion cap, I think they were using a shield that was a little bit too heavy. As you can see, with me moving that guy around, I mean, I'm no stranger to shields. That is unwieldy. And because of that, the moveset kind of gets this slight scrappiness to it, which I think is a bit of a blessing in disguise. While yes, the shield work could be cleaner, I don't really mind. You're fighting up against a bunch of different weapons in a really crazy scenario, so it's whatever. The important thing is that the Warlord always keeps to his main tenets of focus on using the shield. He'll create big openings, but then he'll cover them very smartly. He doesn't block with the shield unless it's a light attack where he's returning an attack of his own. But that's not a heavy thing because he's just looking for that quick little nip. Versus when he does deal with a heavy attack or things along those lines, he puts all his effort into defense with the sword, clears with the shield, to then return on his own. Really the only out-of-place piece is his headbutt, but if I were wearing a helmet and most of the other characters aren't wearing a solid helmet, I'd probably do it too. His thrust is excellent, his footwork is very simplistic but very powerful, and I think his executions in particular show that he has quite a bit of skill when it comes to using his shield in conjunction with his sword. The only other one I want to talk about is just one more, which actually is one of the few executions wherein a Viking uses a half-sword move. So for that, what's going to happen is the Warlord, of course, lands, and this is also where we get to see a little bit of personality here, right? He lands a strike, he clears it, and he will toss the shield to his opponent, who of course will catch it, right? Because you're a minion who's about to die, why wouldn't you catch it? Once they catch the shield, what'll happen is the Warlord almost kind of has a bit of a skip into it as he comes up and in. As soon as they drop that shield, look at him, thrust, pull out, grab the shield, back into it. Now what I think is cool about that is, number one, it looks really good if you do it on a knight character, because he's reinforcing his blow as it goes through the mail at their throat. So if you're looking for something a little bit more historical, I highly recommend that execution, even if the opening looks a little bit kind of dramatic. But even then, it gives a little bit of personality to the Warlord. Most of his personality can be boiled down to either this is a WWE move, or occasionally a good showcase of strength and skill like the ones I showed. There's also several that involve a little bit more grounded wrestling as opposed to the elbow drops, etc. But that one in particular shows a little bit of humor, almost, tossing it, waiting, and then just filling that gap in a very smart way. But all in all, that's going to be the Warlord's moveset. I hope you guys have enjoyed. Like I said, he was my main for quite a while. I really like him as a character. I think he's got a lot of great customization options, and it's fun to make him your own. But a very interesting moveset to do. I think I'm going to probably tackle the Centurion next week, or week after. It may take me a little bit to get that moveset just right. But I hope you have enjoyed, and we'll go over some other movesets another time.